Sparkplug Coffee sponsors this podcast. So before I start yapping about Peck, Niven, Quinn and friends today, I must tell you that you just have to indulge in some of their premium quality coffee. The guys in this movie couldn't enjoy a tasty beverage during their mission. Well, probably not many. They lost all their food, or most of it. But you are on no such mission, right? If so, then get back to it and stop listening to me. Anyway, Sparkplug offers up the best you've ever brewed in your own kitchen. You'll find that it's cheaper and tastier than takeout, but it's also convenient. And that's because Sparkplug tosses your packages of beans right on your front porch whenever you need it, not just whenever they feel like sending it. Americans, you can get this. Canadians, well, of course you can too. And we north of the border dwellers get free shipping. The Autopilot Coffee Club is another aspect of this I can recommend that you look into. You'll get your orders sent when you actually need them, and you can drop out of the club or even just pause your membership anytime you might need to. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is their website. What's that HYES part about? Well, it's our promo code. Throw those 4 letters into the box and get yourself a one-time 20% discount. It stands for, have you ever seen? Did you know that? I think you probably did. Okay, you're on your way to finding your new favorite blend, but you also downloaded this to hear some things about Navarone. The Navarone. So let's pack our bombs, get on a boat, and head to an island. And action. Have you ever seen the Guns of Navarone? Hi and hello, movie monkeys, and thank you from a fairly deep place in my heart, maybe not the bottom of it, but a fairly deep place, for downloading or streaming episode number 667 of Have You Ever Seen? We spend Mondays reviewing classic films and spoiling every bit of them. Normally my wife Bev would chime in by this point, but I, Ryan Ellis, will be prattling on all by myself this time. Bev takes one Monday off per month, and this is the one in May. She'll be back on the job next Monday, though. Oh, before I go any further, I should tip my cap to those Americans who are enjoying Memorial Day. We Canadians had our holiday last week when it was Victoria Day, and May can be a mighty fine month to have a day off. But wherever this podcast finds you, relax for a little while here and engage in a little bit of tomfoolery. Maybe be in your hammock and listen to this podcast. That's what I'd be doing if I was off. The world sucks, and we're about to talk about Nazis, but I'll try to make this review fun. Okay, let's get on with it. Get on with it! Kill Those Cannons was released in the UK in late April 1961, but came out over in this part of the world on June 22nd of 1961. And Columbia Pictures had a big hit on their hands. The Numbers ranks at 3rd that year. The 2 biggest blockbusters that year, according to the Numbers website, were 101 Dalmatians and the eventual winner of many Oscars, West Side Story. Sir Robert Wise's Jets and Sharks Brouhaha not only won a slew of gold baubles, including Best Picture, but, and this is partly because of re-releases, became one of the biggest moneymakers ever. I think that's true about 101 Dalmatians also, the re-releases thing. 2 other 1961 films we've covered, Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Hustler, also made it into the top 20, although this is the first time we've covered a flick from 1961 in quite a while. The only flicks that came out that year that we've reviewed before now were ones I just mentioned, West Side Story, The Hustler, and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and all of them were the topic of discussion way back in the mid-2010s. So this podcast was long overdue to show some love to 61. Where were you at 61, Wolfman Jack? For quite a while now, at this point in a review I've been doing a summary or a skinny, like Bev does, partly to introduce the characters and the actors. Well, I feel like changing it up this time and just leave that for when I do the plot breakdown. Maybe it's repetitive to essentially do the same thing twice, since I itemize every scene anyway when I do the plot breakdown. What do you think? Give me some thoughts on this. I'll give you the contact information later. But okay, just to do a very brief summary, very brief. It's World War II, and a bunch of Allied commandos are assigned to destroy some huge Nazi guns that protect a bay in the Aegean Sea, and when they do that, the good guys can boat out some men who are stranded on a nearby island. Or, in a nutshell, Nazis are stupid. I know you know that, but I bring it up here because if you're going to have such an important part of your defense pointing out the water, maybe assign at least a few soldiers permanently, all the time, to guard it, especially when a spy tells you that an Allied strike force is nearby and obliteration of those guns is their mission. Nazis, you're dumb. No wonder you lost. Okay, so did critics enjoy this film as much as I said the audiences did? Well, it sits at 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, 92, with 23 fresh reviews and only 2 sour ones. The popcorn meter isn't too far off of that with 86% freshness. That 92% is the best J. Lee Thompson ever got in his directing career, by the way. In fact, he had a lot of splats. Only 4 of his films are rated fresh, and all of those are bunched in between 1959 and 1962. Gregory Peck's Tomatoes scores tend to be extraordinary, so 92% is nowhere near good enough to top the charts for him. It's, 10th or something like that, and maybe even lower than that in his rankings. And those numbers are only around 6th or 7th best for both David Niven and Anthony Quinn. The Guns was up for 7 Oscars, but won just one of them, which was for the special effects, shared by Bill Warrington for his visual effects, and Chris Greenham, maybe, for what they called the audible effects. And the only other contender for that award at the 61 show was The Absent-Minded Professor, the Fred MacMurray movie that was remade as Flubber in the 90s. Robin Williams was the Flubber guy. I got thinking about this when I was preparing for this, and I wondered how often the Academy rewarded war films with special effects trophies back in this era. And it was a lot. The Bridges at Toko-Ri won back in the mid-50s. Then The Enemy Below did it just a few years after that, while The Longest Day won the year after this did. And again, this was special effects in total. I think usually it included both visual and audible or audio. And I think it was 1963, the year after The Longest Day won, when they came up with separate visual and sound effects awards. Or sometimes it's been called sound editing over the years. Sound effects was what I always called it because that's what it was when I was a kid. They're never satisfied. I was changing the name. Then they just up and got rid of the sound editing category altogether a few years ago. Now it's just best sound. Although they sometimes didn't even have a competition for the award at all. The Academy would just give something a trophy outright, such as Spielberg flicks Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Raiders. But also the Hindenburg and the Black Stallion did that. Your sound creations were the best, so you have no competition. Here you go! And here's something I noticed too, that when you investigate the history of the sound mixing and sound editing Oscars, man is it dominated by Spielberg and to a lesser extent, James Cameron, but also by him too. Between 1975 and 1998, just about everything Steven Spielberg directed was at least nominated for one of the 2 sound Oscars, and a ton of them won too. Jaws did, Close Encounters did, Raiders, E.T., Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, and Saving Private Ryan. They all won both, or at least one of the 2 sound Oscars. I don't think one of his flicks has won in the past few decades, but they often at least get nominated even then. And for Cameron, winners were Aliens, T2, and Titanic, and nearly everything he's made since Aliens has been at least up for one of the 2 sound Oscars, or even both. And all of that goes for the visual effects Oscar, too. Spielberg films won a ton of VFX awards, while Aliens, T2, Titanic, and both Avatar films were all productions by Cameron that had their name called at the big show, visual effects Oscar winners. Okay, back to the Guns of Navarone. Its failed nominations were for J. Lee Thompson for Best Director, plus Carl Foreman got 2 noms for producing it and for his adapted screenplay. The 3 technical nominations were for Alan Osbiston's editing, John Cox's sound, and Dmitry Tiomkin's music score. Most of those 6 Oscar losses, by the way, were to West Side Story. I've never put much stock in the Golden Globes, but I will mention that they awarded Tiomkin for his music, and the film won Best Motion Picture Drama. What about West Side Story, you say? Didn't it win? No, but it won the Best Musical or Comedy. You might ask, what about The Hustler? Because I was asking about that. To me, it was definitely the best movie of the whole year, one of the best of the 60s, one of the best ever. And they didn't even find space for it at the stupid Globes. It wasn't even nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama. The 3 guys in it, at least, Newman, Gleason, and Scott, were up for their performances at the Globes. At least they had that. Now, a big reason I chose to cover the Guns of Navarone today is that it was 89th on the American Film Institute's list of top 100 thrills. There aren't that many films on the thrills list that we have not reviewed at one time or another at this point. I think it's something like only 6 left. And Navarone is a good pick. It's pretty thrilling. My nerves were jangled more than once during this thing. Jangled. The Guns was also nominated for AFI's Top 100 Cheers, so most inspiring, and Top 25 Music Scores. People love Dmitry Tiomkin's tunes, the Oscars, the AFI, and the Globes. Okay, so Navarone is a well-rewarded and well-regarded classic. Let's start creeping through the plot of, according to the poster, the greatest high adventure ever filmed. Oh, very high, very high. I don't know how to do that stuff. I've never smoked pot in my life. Edibles, yes. Smoking it, no. We open with a thanks to the Admiralty and the War Office for their advice and assistance, along with a sasse fra risto to the Greek people, government, and military. And if Greek people are saying now, that's not how you say thank you in our language, then blame the internet for telling me that it was. Sasse fra risto. I wrote down phonetically. So we get those thank yous. Then we get a voiceover by James Robertson Justice, who also plays Jensen, the guy who assigns the team the mission. And he establishes some facts about Greece and such. Plus we get actual newsreel footage of what's been going on there during the war. It's 1943, and we're introduced to the little island of Kiros, which is just a few miles off the coast of Turkey. Now, I thought the island of Navarone was a real place, but something like 7 entries in the IMDb insists it's not. So many people said this. I get it. It's not real. But when you look up Navarone on Google Maps now, there are some locations. One is on an island, and there's also a Navarone Bay. So maybe there was a made-up place back in the 40s and when the movie was made, but now in 2025, there are, in fact, some real Navarones. And Thompson and Company shot this thing all over the place, by the way. They set up cameras in Greece, naturally, but also Mexico, England, Hollywood, and even Senegal, which is on the west coast of Africa. It's nowhere near where the movie's actually set. Neither are Hollywood, Mexico, and England, for that matter. As for Hollywood and England, whenever a movie's listed as being filmed at least partly in either of those places, you have to assume the interiors were done in studios either on the back lot in LA or at Shepperton in London. But this movie mostly has a we're really there type feel, so I don't think we're seeing all that much fakery, especially when they're outside. Well, the cliff face, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, that was faked, but I think mostly they're outside. Probably in Greece, generally. Or near Greece. So the story goes that 2,000 Allied soldiers on Kiros will be attacked and killed by the Nazis unless they can be evacuated. And the route to get there is protected by the Nazis' tidal weapons, which nearly blew out my headphones when they went off the first time. And after that big setup, then we get the opening credits, which are long. I always thought of early 60s movies as having credits that lasted maybe 30 seconds. These just went on and on. And it's not a complaint, just an observation. Those guns, by the way, are well hidden. The Allies can't drop bombs on the big old radar-operated suckers because they're snugly inside the mountain. And our guys would never get close enough to fire cannons or lob bombs up there from the Aegean, because the Nazis would just use the guns on any boat that approaches. Oh, so that's your game, huh? You shoot at your enemies with your stupid weapons. Bastards. Anyway, the Allies will have to pull an Armageddon and get inside, destroy them from within. It's going to take considerable verve, and the odds are so against them of pulling this off. I gotta say verve, especially when it's an English movie, right? Or English people in this movie. Verve. Nobody involved has much faith it'll work, but they have their orders. We meet the Captain Mallory character first, with Gregory Peck here coming in from Crete and showing up on a base somewhere in the Middle East, as the graphic informs us. Before Mallory can have his private meeting with Jensen, Richard Harris has a small role as Squadron Leader Barnsby, who lays down just how bad the situation in Kiros is. He says bloody plainly about how they don't have a bloody bomb big enough to destroy those bloody guns on bloody Navarone. Bloody. And because that's a juicy swear word if you're British, they dubbed over bloody to something else when the movie played in England. Harris is only in this one scene, by the way, so it's a cool cameo, considering he ended up being a lot more bloody famous than almost anybody else involved in this film. Other than Peck and Quinn, he is the most famous person in this movie besides them. I read something about how Harris was going to be Butcher, the character that Stanley Baker ended up playing, but had to pull out so he could be in some other movie. I don't know if it's connected, but Harris was in the Brando version of Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962, a year after this. And didn't that production go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever? So maybe the two shooting schedules clashed. Although maybe I'm wrong to blame the Mutiny remake. It may not have been connected. It just makes sense, though, similar to how Eyes Wide Shut's long schedule kept crews from shooting Mission Impossible 2 on time, which meant Doug Ray Scott had to pull out of X-Men, which meant Hugh Jackman got to be Wolverine instead. I love my tangents, and here's one. I just went on one there, but here's another one. You know the funny thing about that Bounty remake is that even though it has a 70% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and was nominated for 7 Oscars, I remember people calling it a disaster. There are all kinds of production overruns and many other problems, many of which were blamed on Brando. Plus, it was a box office failure, but it doesn't have that bad of a legacy beyond those things. I think now it's looked at pretty well, really. So back to Guns of Navarone. Mallory learns that the higher-ups want him to help a small team climb an impossible cliff and get to the great big bazookas from behind, which is similar to a major sequence in Lawrence of Arabia. O'Toole and his cohorts ride across the desert in Lawrence to take out some guns and take the town, I guess, too. And those guns point out to the water, and that's an attack nobody bothered to defend against because it seemed impossible they tried crossing that desert. In any case, Mallory was considered a world-class mountain climber before the war, even if his response to this idea is to tell the man in charge, Jensen, and Major Franklin, the Anthony Quayle character, that he wouldn't try that climb even during the day, and not during a war, so he's effectively saying no. But they want this climb to happen at night when there's less chance they'd be discovered by the Germans, bloody Jerry's, and Jensen's not going to take no for an answer. So he plows ahead, laying the entire plan out for Mallory and us, and introducing him to the team. Now, we don't get the pirates and cutthroats in person just yet. He calls them pirates and cutthroats. This meet and greet is in the form of paperwork and photographs. Mallory realizes that he's going to have to do this, so he sets his jaw and tracks down the Anthony Quinn character Stavros, who he's known for quite a long time. This tough old bird is in, pretty much without question. Stavros is a colonel in the Greek military, so as Mallory says later on, he outranks them all, even though he almost always follows orders on the mission. He doesn't ever really give them, despite his colonelness. We do get one more scene with Jensen, where he admits to his aide that he doesn't think they have any chance of succeeding. He thinks they won't even get halfway there. But he has to follow orders too, even if he's sad that he just assigned 6 men to probable death, and the couple thousand who are stranded on the island would be cooked. So anyway, we know about that badass Greek, Stavros, but the rest of the A-team, maybe you can hire, the A-team, is the explosives expert Miller, who's David Niven, the Stanley Baker character, who's Butcher Brown, and he's the muscle who's great with a knife, and James Darren is Papademos, a young soldier who's actually from Navarone. Plus, of course, we've got Mallory and Franklin. You always get a chalkboard scene in a movie like this, and here it's in the form of looking at a map, where we see that they'll have a hard enough job just getting across the mountains to even get close to the coast of the Aegean where the guns are. During all this, they're interrupted by a spy named Nikolai, who Stavros drags into the room and finds out is just a laundry boy from some other military guy. But Franklin wants the guy out of his hair and nowhere near them. He was spying on a very classified conversation. Classified? No one tell Pete Hegseth. I guess this scene is mostly in here to establish that Mallory is a cool customer, since he diffuses the situation and keeps the guy from being killed. Franklin's so ruthless that he orders Papademos to just shoot the guy, and to shoot the major too if he interferes. But good old reliable Peck talks them down. The Magnificent Six get themselves a crappy fishing boat, and they certainly don't wear their army uniforms, and they're off. They stay frosty when a German boat happens by and announces that they're coming aboard. Mallory pretends all is cool and assures them with a big smile on his face that they're just doing some fishing. But the Nazi bastards do come aboard and start searching the boat, not even knowing their right to be so suspicious. They would have been wise to just open fire. Well, open fire. Only our guys do that to them. Papademos was hiding a machine gun under a blanket in his lap the whole time. The A-team works in unison and takes out all the Nazis, then blows up their boat and sinks it to the bottom of the Aegean. And they can't be the A-team because they kill people. The A-team never killed people in their missions. You ever notice that in that show? Nobody really died despite all the shooting and blowing up. Well, one German did survive long enough to sneak up behind the butcher, but Mr. Brown, who's known for being brilliant with a knife, remember, freezes, and it takes Papademos to machine gun the guy to death and save him. It's probably best if you plan to machine gun somebody, you do it until he's dead. During a pounding rainstorm later that night, Mallory confesses to Franklin that Stavros has vowed to kill him when the war is over. Mallory used bad judgment and was nice to some Germans, long ago, years ago, which led to Andrea's family being killed. And he doesn't blame the germs. He blames the captain for trying to be decent back in the early days of this war when it seemed like that was still possible. I think that's how Peck even puts it. Stavros has been working the sails and battening things down during the storm, so this conversation organically establishes his motivations without him even being part of the conversation. Good scene. Anyway, the storm is so bad that they end up crashing into some rocks and have to abandon ship before it sinks. The surf beats the crap out of them as they try to get their stuff to the shore. Then they barely avoid being swallowed up by an enormous tsunami. It's a slow-moving wave, though, which takes forever to get there. The six survive, but barely, and down goes their vessel. But at least they ended up at their destination, right by the south cliff. And it's nighttime, so they can climb without being seen. It's slippery on those rocks, though, because it's still raining. But Mallory diligently keeps going up, hammering in clips every few feet to help the others climb up after him. I have to say that making it look like Peck himself is climbing up a sheer rock face, it's quite convincing. I wondered if they shot this on the ground and then tilted the camera to make it look like they were going straight up a vertical scariness, which I believe has been fairly common in the history of filmmaking, and then read online later that that was the case. Mike Nichols does a very similar thing in Postcards from the Edge, where Meryl Streep plays an actor making a police movie, and she's supposed to be hanging off a building by her fingernails, yet the director calls cut and she relaxes and puts up her hands, revealing that this is just a painted background and she's lying on the ground. It's a good laugh in that movie, but they also revealed a trade secret. Wonder if Hollywood people were bothered about that. Don't give away the secrets. Part of what Mallory said to Franklin earlier that night is that he wasn't sure if maybe Stavros might kill him even before the end of the war. And as it turns out, he has his chance. He could just let Mallory drop when he has to save the captain's life after he almost loses his grip on the mountain. But Stavros hangs on and Mallory eventually grabs a rope. Good on Stavros that he put the mission ahead of his revenge lust. And he did save a man's life, even if he wants to kill him. Kill him later. You're busy. The two team up to ambush and kill a German soldier who's out on patrol, then wait for the other four to join them on top of the cliff. But Franklin loses his grip and slides down quite a long way, badly jamming his ankle in the process. Worse than just a jam, in fact, his leg is broken in 2 places. But Mallory and Miller go down and pull him out the rest of the way, and even though the boat barely got them there, they managed to salvage almost all their stuff, except the food and the medical supplies. Oh, that! Who needs to eat? When he has a minute, Mallory questions Brown about not finishing off that guy on the boat when he had the chance. But the butcher says he's tired and just isn't as sharp as he used to be. But he'll get the job done. Mallory fires back that his job is to kill enemy soldiers, and he failed pretty badly in doing that then. There's a phone up there by the side of the mountain and it rings, so Mallory answers and pretends to be the soldier they threw off the cliff. But the man back in the base doesn't buy it and sends out a few trucks to see what's what. Peck speaking German here and Greek in other scenes wasn't him, apparently. They dubbed in somebody else. It's a pretty good job of mixing that audio of the other guy speaking because I didn't notice the voice was particularly different. Usually I notice that kind of thing, but I didn't this time. They debate about what to do with Franklin, who they'll have to carry on a stretcher. Mallory doesn't want to leave him behind because the Germans would just fill him with truth-telling drugs and force him to give up the ghost about why he's there. Miller thinks that's hogwash and the Major would never crack, but I think he's just being optimistic. Look at Big Bad Arnold in True Lies. He succumbed to the truth serum. It's Stavros who claims the best move is to just put a bullet in Roy's noodle right now. Better for him, better for us. Savage, but it's not like he doesn't have a point. But Mallory overrules that and assigns Brown the job of taking care of the Major. A graphic tells us that they're on the third day of the mission, and it's even snowing now. Really? This close to North Africa? So they take a break in a cave, and Franklin finally comes to. He'd been passed out all this time. He says they must leave him behind, but Franklin won't hear of it. Not a bit of it. Meantime, Brown finds out on the radio that headquarters has discovered that the Germans are going to attack them in Onkiros a day earlier, so they're going to have to pick up the Navaronish pace. And while the five of them are hearing that crappy news, Franklin starts to crawl away, and when they find him, he's ready to put a shot into his own skull, rather than be a huge burden. So Mallory improvises and lies to the Major, telling him that the mission has been called off. The brass has decided to do an amphibious landing instead, so our guys just have to get to safety on the island. I guess it isn't the most unbelievable lie of all time, and Franklin seems to believe it. He doesn't want to kill himself or be captured, obviously, so it's either believe or go back to the taking myself out plan. The fellas slip away as a German patrol out walking fire at Stavros, who takes out a few of them on his own and buys them enough time to get clear. In many war films, he might die doing this, but he's Anthony Quinn, and this wasn't even halfway into the movie. Plus, we just have to follow up on that vow to kill Captain Mal when all this is over. The vow to kill Mal. But no, Andrea stays alive during that skirmish and even gets to the rendezvous ahead of them. The rendezvous. They may not have anything to eat, but they're secure enough there to catch some Z's, with Stavros taking the first watch. We were due to meet Irene Pappas, who plays Maria Papademos, and we do here. Yep, same last name that Spiros has. She hasn't seen her brother in a very long time, and she doesn't even realize that he's part of the group, even after she gets a good look at his face. This happened in that Buster Keaton movie Steamboat Bill Jr. that I reviewed earlier this year, where Keaton's father doesn't recognize his own son either. Somehow he looks that different from the last time they laid eyes on each other. But anyway, Maria and her buddy Anna, the Gia Scala character, were out skulking, and the guys knocked Anna out when she came into the shelter. She's got food, though, so they just ripped that right off the unconscious woman. After the Papademos have their reunion, we learn that Anna has gone through hell, and after all they've done to her and her family, she's a big-time German hater. When she comes to, she's ready to fight, but Maria convinces her that this group are friendlies. So now the team is 8, although Franklin's really just along for the ride, what with those leg fractures and all. In fact, Brown tells Mallory that gangrene is set in on Franklin's bum leg, and if they don't cut it off, the Major is gonna die painfully. He and Miller argue about it for a minute, but the captain asserts his authority. After all, ever since Franklin took the spill, he's been in charge. Brown also wants to be let back into the captain's good graces for not killing that German, but the Mal man wants to think about whether or not he's cool with forgiving and forgetting. The Germans know there's something going on by this point, and so they send out some planes to take shots at the team. But they hustle into a cave, and somehow, no one got shot. Although Anna's limping now, so she either twisted her ankle or got bulleted and won't admit it. Or she's faking it. More on this later. They come across a town and use the noise and pomp of a wedding to sneak into a house, partly to get their injured man out of sight and get him a doctor. But the team doesn't know that the Germans are there in the town too. Those obnoxious fascists never know when they're not wanted. The gang enjoys the wedding for a bit, even singing along with the celebrators, until they're surrounded by the Germans. None of them will own up to where the explosives are, and it looks like it's just about execution time, until Stavros pretends to turn coward. He says he's just a poor fisherman from Cyprus who was taken hostage. He claims they made him wear the shoulder holster he has on, and he doesn't know anything about the explosives. When a hard-ass comes in and plays bad cop, Stavros really hams it up, and even gets down on his knees and begs. But this blonde so-and-so figures out that Franklin has a bad leg. My mom used to call people so-and-so when she was mad at them, including me when I was being bad, which was not often, but I was called so-and-so. I love that one. And he'll start ripping and tearing at that bad leg if they don't fess up. But after Andrea goes full-on hysterical, rolling around and pretending that he's sick, 2 Germans grab him to make him stop, which allows him to throw them to the ground, and the other heroes get the drop on the rest of them. The Nazis clearly don't have their, shall we say, poop wired tight to not be able to stop this from happening. They're the ones with guns. But after tying them up and taking their Nazi uniforms, I like when Niven casually says, "Heil, everybody." They tell the commanding officer that they're going to leave Franklin behind with them. The rules of war say they have to take care of him, and the officer even replies he's fine with that because he doesn't make war on wounded men. Although in reality, German officers were in fact ordered to kill Allied commandos, especially on missions like this. And that was a war crime. When the war was over, many German officers were harshly punished for doing things like that. I think Judgment at Nuremberg is about many things, what they did to the Jews, of course, but it was also about how they treated Allied soldiers who were captured. They steal a truck, and on the drive, Maria asks Stavros some questions about his family. The 2 Greeks bond, but the tension's thick because Mallory's sitting between them, and we know that he's the one Andrea blames for him not even having a family anymore. Mallory tells the group that he lied to Franklin about their attack plans, hoping when the Germans drug him and ask him the right questions, they'll have bad intel and they'll reduce the security around the guns. He actually wants to use the fact that the Germans will sweat this info out of Franklin against them. But Miller morals up, and he's furious because he cares about Roy Franklin as a person, not just as a fellow soldier and his superior officer. I'm not with him on this, though. Miller's heart's in the right place, but Franklin himself would understand this move. For one thing, they're trying to save thousands of men, and he wants the job done even more than Mallory does. He was willing to kill that Nikolai guy in case he was a spy who was going to rat them out, and I guess Miller forgets that they're following orders, too. If that captain's lie seems like a craptastic thing to do to an injured man, well, it's war. If I were in Franklin's shoes and found out later that Mallory lied and realized why he did that, I'd completely understand. It's actually similar to the scene in Bridge on the River Kwai when Holden rages at Jack Hawkins about how it's important to not die by the rules, die like a gentleman, but to live like a human being. But Holden in that and Niven in this, listen up. You're fighting a war. Morality is a gray area. Plus, leaving Franklin with the Nazis is also better than killing him the minute he busted his leg would have been, as Stavros wanted them to do. Although as savage as that would have been, it was a reasonable argument too. Hell, Franklin was ready to fire a bullet into his own booper. So this might be Niven's red letter scene in the whole movie, and he plays it well enough, but I think this whole rant is BS. And that how to die by the rules scene is certainly not my favorite part of Bridge on the River Kwai either. So we go back to Franklin and his torturers for a few minutes, and they are torturing him. He's already in pain when a head honcho comes in and says to use the scopolamine. That's their truth serum. True to form, they're doing exactly what Mallory thought they might. Back with the other guys again. They kill some Germans in a small truck on the way, I think just to give us an action scene again, and then blaze their way to where the guns are, because this is the last day of the mission. Graphics on screen keep reminding us of how close to the final day they are. So they arrive at the base of the mountain at 9 p.m., and that got me thinking. There was snow in that scene earlier, so it can't be the middle of the summer. Okay, they're on a mountain, which is high up, but are they that high? In any case, it's not fully dark at 9 o'clock when it's not the dead of summer. Maybe it was the dead of summer and that snow thing was just a weird anomaly. Anyway, they're ready to get on with it when Miller storms in and announces that all of his explosives have been tampered with. And it wasn't a bad coincidence. He brought all sorts of triggers and timers, and not one of them works. He accuses Anna of being the saboteur. I think the movie was setting up a little bit that Brown maybe was the guy, but he says Anna. He claims she was faking the limp to stay behind in the cave after the plane attack, so she could leave a note with some intel for the Germans. He even suspects that she signaled the Germans with a mirror when she was up in a tree, supposedly on the lookout, and he insists that they were outed at the wedding because of her. So she informed on them. He figures she sabotaged his switchers and timers during the one chance she had to do it, when she was alone with the bombs and they were doing something else. They even get some proof when Stavros tears open her top to reveal that she doesn't have scars all over her back that Maria told him that she did, supposedly put there by the Nazis. But the woman who has never spoken in this movie until now speaks perfectly good English and apologizes for what she did, but says she can't take pain. They didn't need to torture her to turn her into a spy, they just had to threaten to. And she didn't turn coat back and join these guys because she thinks they don't have a chance of succeeding. Well, the people who gave them the job of doing this feel that way too, so she's not alone in not having faith. Miller gets in Mallory's face that the 3 choices they have with Franklin are now 3 choices about what to do with Anna, and he insists that she has to be killed. He just doesn't want to do it himself. They start shouting at each other, with Peck getting to blow up about how somebody's got to be in charge and make the hard decisions. Miller says he's always been fine with remaining a corporal because he admits he never wanted that kind of responsibility. Plus, we already know that Brown is at the end of his rope. And it's not like Mallory's dying to be there either. They're all a little afraid. Look, if I'm in their shoes, give me the gun. Big talk from me, I know, and I've never been in a fight in my life, and I obviously haven't killed anyone. But she does have to die. She knows too much and she nearly got them all killed, multiple times. So just do it. Mallory's about to listen to Miller's challenge to do his own dirty work, although the corporal got all moral again and made a move to stop him. Only Maria pulls the trigger first. She may have been a staunch defender of her friend up until now, but she's either mad at her for the betrayal or she thinks lady-on-lady violence will save the team from breaking into civil war. After the rest of them clear out, Mallory demands that Miller figure something out with the fuses because he's supposed to be a genius with bombs. If he can't do it, the captain's so fried after all that's happened, he's probably going to put him in the grave. Although I admire Mallory for not being even angrier than he is about all the insubordination, Miller is just a corporal, and beaking off like that to a higher-ranked officer is a good way to get yourself court-martialed. We're in the home stretch now, though, so the guys split up. Papademos and Stavros provide a few distractions and make the Germans mobilize away from the guns, while Maria and Brown commandeer a boat. Mallory and Miller head inside the mountain to go, "Get the guns. Blow up the guns." They still have the SS uniforms on, so they're able to drive the truck right through the ruckus the others have created and not be noticed. Old Keith uses a silencer to kill a few Germans before he and Miller gear up and get into an elevator that takes them down to where the guns are. I assume they've got German switches and timers now, since Miller had given up on his own, or maybe they found some Greek switches and timers. Or he rigged something, being a genius and all. Those guns looked impressive when we first saw them, but now up close? No wonder no Allied ships travel through this part of the Aegean. These things is huge. While Maria drives the boat over to where she'll be able to pick the guys up, Brown hesitates to kill another German who's gotten on board. He does stab the guy when he starts shouting for help, but the SOB stabs back, and the butcher's dead. He's been butchered. Meanwhile, Papademos machine guns a lot of Jerry's before one of them takes him out. You had to lose at least some of these guys in this mission, but they survived through a lot, and now they're going down fast. The M-boys had locked the iron door behind them, but the Germans worked furiously to cut it open. The clock is ticking, and I'm thinking at this point, why was this movie only ranked 89th on the top 100 thrills? This is exciting stuff. It could have been way higher on the list. Miller prepares backups of the bombs that he's attached to the guns, assuming the Germans will find those right away. Especially that rat bomb, which I guess was a standard move during the war, to use a dead rat like that attached to an explosive. Miller's got a failsafe in the elevator that he hopes the Germans will ignite without even trying to, and the M's get out of there just in time by climbing some ropes down to the water. While they do rappel down quite a ways, they need to get clear ASAP, so Mallory, well, Peck's stuntman, does a pretty high dive down into the H2O. Dives into the H2O from that height. Then Niven's stuntman just drops off the rope and falls akimbo. From that height, they both probably should be hurt worse than they are. Miller can't swim, but Mallory's able to fish him out of the water. And there's Maria with the boat. Mallory had been mad at the butcher and probably would never have fully trusted him again, but he didn't want to come aboard and see his dead body either. So he looks a little sad. And even though Mallory could have let Stavros drown, since the Greek is hurt and can't quite get on the boat without help, he drags his old friend out of the water too. I guess saving Andrea's life here makes up for being indirectly responsible for the man's family's deaths. So it's just Mallory, Miller, Stavros, and Maria left. Franklin's still with the Nazis. We never see him again after the truth serum scene. And the other three are dead. Pretty standard stuff for war movies. Even when you accomplish your mission, you lose a bunch of guys in the process. And through all this, the ships that were sent to evacuate the 2,000 men are getting close, so the Nazis wheel out some giant warheads to load into the titular cannons. It's the titular gun! They do fire off a few shots and nearly hit the boats, but they come up a bit short. And it's a nice touch when all the soldiers put their hands over their ears in unison, so they don't go deaf when those giant Navaronian guns go off. The Germans do find the explosives that are attached to the guns, and they think that's that. But on their way back down in the elevator, the switch that Miller had set up there has its circuit completed and kerblamo! Now Thompson teases us a few times with the elevator not quite going down low enough to set up the fuses. But then it does finally, of course. There's an enormous explosion, half the mountain is torn apart, and the big guns end up in the Aegean. The explosion also takes out a lot of the soldiers too, the German soldiers. So we've won this round. But interestingly, the Nazis were the ones who won this battle in reality. This conflict in the Aegean, that ended up being a tick on their side of the column. This movie lied to me, and to you too. Now that the job is done, Maria decides she's going back to Mandrakis, and Andrea is going to go with her. She knows her people will be the ones who will pay for what just happened. The Nazis are going to make sure of that. So she's going to continue the fight there, and the Quinster wants to help, and to be with her. He seems to have forgiven Mallory too. No more death threats. The fatwa is over. I've been lied to again. He was supposed to make Keith stop breathing. Oh, wait a minute now. The war isn't over yet. Just this mission. So maybe Mallory shouldn't rest too comfortably after D-Day. Stavros might be standing outside his house like Jason in Friday the 13th Part 2, ready to stab a screwdriver into his head. Anyway, Miller apologizes to Mallory for what he said before, namely all that insubordinating, and while these two men are never going to be best buddies, they're able to share a cigarette and talk about how neither of them thought they'd pull this off. But the job is done, and they're proud soldiers. Now, Peck apparently had an unusual take on the characters. Niven loves Quayle, while Peck loves Quinn. Since Quinn wants Papas, and Quayle was already back with the Germans, Niven and Peck catch each other on the rebound, and they live happily ever after. Although that's just Peck's tongue-in-cheek thought, I guess, right? Of what Foreman wrote, and what McClane wrote in the book, too. Now, I don't believe that last bit about the two guys living happily ever after anyway, because there's still tension there, and it's not sexual tension. But the thought that any two men could fall in love during a war, this war, whatever, any war, that makes sense to me. And if the world wasn't so bigoted, they could just be in love, fight a war, and knock some boots when they got the chance. But no, I think Peck was just having fun with this. I read sexual tension between men in movies all the time, and I've talked about it in other podcasts, but I didn't see it with this one. But that's that. The credits roll, and even though this was 2 hours and 37 minutes long, I didn't really want it to end. I was locked in and really enjoyed it. This was actually an era of many big-budget war films that turned out to be very successful, and most of them are still remembered fondly. Think of The Longest Day and The Great Escape, both of which came out the next few years after this raked in the box office bucks. They're long, too, and The Great Escape especially is well worth that amount of butt-numbing, just like this was. Plus, the release of Navarone wasn't that far removed from another long-but-it's-worth-it war flick, Bridge on the River Kwai, which was also made by Columbia, and it was written by the same guy. So yeah, people obviously weren't getting sick of paying to see these impossible task World War II type movies, especially when the actors were big stars and the film was technically so well done. So Navarone isn't my number one favorite war film of all time, but it's somewhere on the list. Not every critic who reviewed this back in '61 raved, and that's not surprising because there's always somebody who doesn't like something that everybody else does. But one critic called it many-colored rubbish. Okay, you didn't like it that much, dude, but rubbish? Unless a story like this doesn't interest you in the first place, you have to give them credit for setting up the mission, putting a reasonable amount of obstacles in their way, having many close calls, and then the movie ends where it should, with them destroying the title guns. I love irony in film and love being surprised, but sometimes you need to pay off what you've set up in a straight-ahead kind of way. Mission accomplished. So the cast. Gregory Peck was in just one film that made AFI's top 100 list, and it won him his only Oscar, To Kill a Mockingbird. Old Greg comes up once every couple or 3 years on this podcast in our chats about Roman Holiday, Cape Fear, and The Omen. I have to be honest, though, that I've never loved him as an actor, not as much as many of his contemporaries. I find him to be stiff, similarly to how Gary Cooper was. Coop and Peck both got to play their share of good roles, but their default was, I don't know, an almost stilted way of speaking. I say that's true about Cooper even in High Noon, which is a terrific performance overall, won him an Oscar, he's great in that, but there are times he's a little bit stilted. Peck, though, more than even Cooper, has a stentorian quality, and he almost always sounded about the same. It felt like he should have only played presidents or priests, or army guys pulling off dangerous missions. Although I say all that, and yet I have to admit that it's not so true about his work in this. Considering what they're doing and how serious this mission is, the Peck man shows a bit of joie de vivre in Guns, even a sense of humor at times. On the flip side, though, Mallory's forceful and tough when he has to be, even cruel. And I do like his work in, well, all the films we've discussed, those 5 films. We chose well. We avoided the stentorian movies, I guess. Now, it's unlikely an American would end up being in charge of this mission. Okay, Franklin's in charge, but Mallory is the man with the plan once the major gets hurt. I guess in the book, Mallory was from New Zealand. Logically, he should have been, of course, English, but the Pecker pulled a Connery and just talked like he always did. I'll talk how I feel like it, even when I play an Irishman. Or a Russian. Not that Mallory couldn't have been somebody who grew up in America, and then became a Russian citizen before the war, and that's why he's such a key part of this mission. Is this just me reaching, though? Probably. Really what it is that the studio wanted a big star on the role no matter where he was from, and Peck was certainly still that in the early 60s. Considering he was about 50 during shooting, David Niven was too old to be a corporal, but that could be explained by him saying he never wanted the responsibility of being a much higher rank, since it would mean him having to make those hard decisions that Mallory does. So he could have refused promotion, the character could have. Plus, typical for movies, I'm sure they were pretending he was 10 or even 20 years younger than his actual age was anyway. Anyway, Dave got sick during filming and ended up in the hospital, but left against doctor's orders so he could finish the movie. Leaving before he was fully recovered messed him up even worse, and when he went back to the medical facility, his recovery took a long time. Dedicated actor, though. Niven was infamously the guy who was about to present the Best Picture Oscar of the year of The Streaker in 1974. He won his own gold trophy for Separate Tables in the late 50s. That was his only ever nomination, incidentally, and he was the host of the Oscars that year. I guess no one else has done that before or since. Hosted the show and won a trophy during the same show. As for Niven's filmography, he had an uncredited role in Mutiny on the Bounty, the original 1935 one, I mean, and then was in Wuthering Heights a few years later, where he was credited as Edgar. He was also the beleaguered holy man in The Bishop's Wife, so now we've covered 4 Niven films. Even though he's Mexican, Antonio Rodolfo Quinn Oaxaca, Oaxaca, is probably best known for playing Zorba the Greek just a few years after this. Anthony Quinn also won 2 supporting actor Oscars in the span of just 4 years back in the 50s for Viva Zapata with Marlon Brando and Lust for Life with Kirk Douglas. He was in La Strada for Fellini too, and while I love the Oxbow Incident, highly recommend that, and Last Train from Gun Hill, recommend that one pretty highly too, I'm surprised to say that I think the only time he's ever come up on a podcast on this channel before today was Lawrence of Arabia. The man was in plenty of classics, but have you ever seen his only quinned it up twice in 12 years? We quinned it up. Anthony Quayle was in Lawrence of Arabia with the Quinn Man, but also had credits in things like Hitchcock's The Wrong Man and Woody Allen's Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid to Ask. Tony made a pretty nice living working in television, too. Stanley Baker worked mostly in epics and war films, but how about this run of flicks he was in during the mid-50s? Richard III for Laurence Olivier, Helen of Troy for Robert Wise, and Alexander the Great for Robert Rossen. Whether or not the films themselves were all that great, I don't know, but those are 3 uber-famous topics made by some very talented directors. Most of the actors in this cast lived nice long lives. Peck did, and I think Quinn did, but Baker got lung cancer and died when he was only 48. James Darren barely speaks in this, and his death is a little stupid, trying to take on the German army all by himself, plus he has a mission he should be trying to accomplish, which is to help out Mallory and Miller. He's solid, though, as a quietly reliable member of the team. He went on to be a regular on the Shatner cop series T.J. Hooker, which I watched here and there when I was a kid, but he was only in 22 big-screen flicks in total, many of which were Gidget sequels, and the original Gidget. Irene Pappas went on to be in Zorba the Greek with Quinn and Anne of the Thousand Days with Quayle. One of the biggest titles I saw in her filmography beyond this and those two, though, was Costa Gavras' Z, or Zed if you're Canadian or British, Z. Any film fan who hasn't seen Z really should. Gia Scala was in a lot of flicks in the late 50s. A few of those were for Douglas Sirk, including All That Heaven Allows and Never Say Goodbye. Plus she was in a Lee J. Cobb movie I saw earlier this year, The Garment Jungle. It sounds like Pappas and Scala's characters were men in the book. I'm guessing the studio wanted at least some women in this movie, though, and neither of them feel shoehorned in like that scene in Bridge on the River Kwai where Holden has a little bit of a fling with a nurse. Women were allowed to be part of the resistance too, man. In fact, it makes sense. The men Greeks were probably dead or off fighting somewhere else. The ladies had to step up, and the 2 actresses are pretty solid in this. They do seem like badass fighters. James Robertson Justice was like almost everybody else in this cast, in that he hasn't come up on this channel very often, or even at all before this review today. For him, this is review number 1. His other credits are highlighted by being in 2 other Peck films, Captain Horatio Hornblower and Moby Dick, then Chitty Chitty Bang Bang later in the 60s. Peck wasn't part of the Chitty or the Bang, though. Their director, who often worked with Peck, was J. Lee Thompson. I don't recognize most of the Englishman's pre-Guns credits, but he was on a hot streak in the early 60s, because he went from this to direct Peck in Cape Fear the following year, a film we covered just last year. Pretty good thriller. He also worked with Peck again on McKenna's Gold and The Chairman later in the 60s. But his career wasn't all about the Gregor. He manned the bullhorn for a couple Planet of the Apes sequels in the early 70s, Conquest of and Battle for. Then the juicy plums dried up, and his latter days were far from the prestige of even those Apes flicks, with credits in the horror movie Happy Birthday to Me and many, many Charles Bronson movies. Bronson, including the 4th Death Wish. That dude just refused to die. He made 4, maybe even more than 4 of those. Now, speaking of Charles Bukowski, I can't forget to include the little detail that while I was working on this review, I chose to half-watch a Bronson movie called Murphy's Law on Tubi. I didn't know anything about it going in, but guess who directed it? J. Lee Thompson. I only found out as the opening credits played out. As for Thompson making this movie and getting his only Oscar nomination for it, he must have been pretty proud. Cape Fear is a hell of a thriller too, but that's the only other film of his that I've seen that comes close to being as good as this. Although Johnny Boy wasn't good at talking about the movie, he does a commentary on the DVD that I remember being one of the dullest I've ever heard. Maybe it was just his speaking voice, not so much the content. I don't remember now, it's a long time ago. Before I got married, I always made time to watch every scrap of bonus material on my DVDs, and I never missed a commentary. But he made it tough to keep listening to him on that one. Although I guess the writer-producer Carl Foreman actually hired Alexander, I think you say McKendrick, not Mackendrick, anyway, to direct this before Alex left the production, right before they started filming. Mackendrick, whatever, was the guy who made the brilliant Sweet Smell of Success 4 years before this came out. He was a curious choice to be picked for a war film of this scale, since his pre-Sweet Smell credits were mostly those Ealing comedies that he made with, Guinness and maybe even Sellers? Good movies, but they weren't a great tip that he could pull off the Guns of Navarone. But hey, no complaints at all about Thompson. Foreman should have been happy with who he did end up having direct his screenplay. So yes, the producer was also the screenwriter, Carl Foreman. His script was based on Alistair MacLean's 1957 novel. Foreman and Michael Wilson were both blacklisted when they wrote the screenplay for and shared an Oscar for, and I say this one again, Bridge on the River Kwai. They didn't get their Oscars until many years later, but they did write that script, not Pierre Boulle. He wrote the book, I think it was, and anyway. Bill Holden was the star of that great flick, and Foreman wanted him to be in this too, but Holden said no, at least partly because he didn't want to repeat himself. They are pretty similar stories. Carl was also up for writing High Noon, which we've of course reviewed. That's a movie that John Wayne and Howard Hawks didn't like, partly I think because of what were viewed as communist sympathies in High Noon. And Foreman really was a commie. He wasn't just accused of it, he was one. I don't think that fact should have ruined his career for so long, but truth is truth. Carl had a story credit on the sequel to this film, Force 10 from Navarone, which wasn't nearly as successful as Guns was, but maybe that's because they didn't use Thompson or Foreman as director, writer, and producer. Force 10 didn't tank, but it wasn't a huge seat filler the way this was. It didn't get any Oscar or AFI recognition the way this did either. The mission Robert Shaw, Harrison Ford, and Carl Weathers were assigned there was the old standby of blowing up a bridge. Shaw was coming, so many bridges today. Shaw was coming off Jaws, Ford was coming off Star Wars, and Weathers was coming off Rocky, so you can understand why they were cast. Pretty big names at that point, especially Ford, of course. When I should say that Shaw played Mallory, Edward Fox played Miller, and Ford played Barnsby. I'm not sure it's the same Barnsby as Harris played here, but he's Barnsby. I don't think anybody from the original cast came back for the sequel. Guns' cinematography was by Oswald Morris. He won some gold for shooting Fiddler on the Roof for Norman Jewison 10 years later. He was also behind the camera for the Best Picture winning Oliver, which we talked about on this channel a few years ago. He also worked on a film we might cover before this year's over, The Man Who Would Be King. But I love this factoid. He ended his career by shooting The Great Muppet Caper and The Dark Crystal, both of which I saw on the big screen when I was a kid. And I didn't go to movies much at all when I was 7 or 8 years old. Those were two of the rare ones. We lived in the country, and the nearest theater was maybe a half hour away, maybe even more. I was more into toys on the floor in front of me than movies on the big screen above me. If you've seen this movie and you watched it on DVD like I did, tell me, did it look like it was stretched out to you? It's in the proper 2:3:5:1 aspect ratio, yet the faces in particular looked like they were off. Although I didn't notice it after 10 or 20 minutes. Maybe I just got used to it, or my eyes were playing weird tricks on me in the early going, but I could swear they seemed like they were stretched, at least for a while. Alan Osbiston cut the picture. Nothing stands out in his resume like this does, but he did cut The Entertainer and Lord Jim. I have to add that I found it weird that when a dissolve from one scene to another was about to happen, the image would have a change of color, then they'd do the dissolve, and the color of the incoming image would also look off until the effect was completed. It was a sync problem, I guess. I've seen this in old movies before, but I thought it was a problem for low-budget films or ones that were made a lot earlier than 1961. It was something with the equipment back then, I guess. You could always guess when the scene was about to change, though, so it was easy to know when to hit the pause button to go refill the water bottle, or empty the old bladder. The music was by the legendary Dmitri Tiomkin. DT won 4 Oscars in his career, including 2 for High Noon. One of those was for Best Song. He also worked on You Can't Take It With You, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Meet John Doe, Shadow of a Doubt, It's a Wonderful Life, Red River, Strangers on the Train, Dial M for Murder, Giant, Rio Bravo, and many great films we haven't covered. But all 11 of those, we have. And I said he won 4 Gold Naked Guys, but he was nominated for something like 18 more, including for this motion picture. So to start gearing down this review, I can say I absolutely enjoyed seeing this movie again and even found it was a lot of fun, even if it took up half my morning. And how could I not love it? I'm a war movie guy, and these men put everything on the line and came up big to save the lives of 2,000 people. That's obviously a hero move. Plus they got to grease some Nazis and make some friends along the way. Win-win. I've seen it probably 4 times now, although I don't remember liking it as much as I did this time, even though I've got it as my number 2 movie of 1961, right behind The Hustler. But one last thing. I have to ask if it's fair to consider this movie pacifist or anti-war, as Peck wanted it to be. Well, it didn't inspire me to want to go shoot people and blow up their stuff, which some war movies do. Or some of them rev you up and hope you'll sign up for the service altogether like Top Gun does. Of course, this isn't exactly Paths of Glory either. That is anti-war, without a doubt. If this wasn't enough of a war is hell, so never do it movie for Peck's taste, Mr. Pacifist, then at least he should have been glad to know he had a very good motion picture in his hands. It's one of his best. So that was how I saw The Guns of Navarone, or if you're Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction, The Guns of the Navarone. In a minute, I'll let you know how to get in touch with us, and also I'll promote some films we'll discuss in the future. But first, you know what happens now. Trivia questions. I've got a trio. There's no theme this time, just 3 unrelated questions. So number 1, who played Arnold's daughter in Commando? Question number 2, who played Achoo in Mel Brooks' Robin Hood, Men in Tights? And question number 3, what's the name of the movie where Russell Crowe tries to break his wife Elizabeth Banks at a prison? Okay, answers to those will be forthcoming, but only after I tell you that on Friday, I'll be back on the mic, and of course I'll be talking to you on my own. Bev wasn't here today, of course, but she doesn't work Fridays at all. I'll be covering our first ever Jean-Pierre Melville flick, Le Samurai. And then on Monday, next Monday, the wife and I will kick off June by reviewing Sense and Sensibility. Okay, here comes the part where I ask you to pay us back for all the free content we offer by subscribing to our channel in your podcast app, but to also rate our show and maybe write up a little review. Subscribe to us on YouTube as well. You can find our stuff in the search bar on YouTube by typing in @HYES Ellis. We're on social media sometimes. Hunt down Bev on Twix and Blue Sky by looking for @BevEllisEllis and Bev Ellis Ellis, respectively. No @ for her on the sky. I'm Ryan-Ellis on Blue Sky, and I'm @MovieFiend51 on Twix. Or go the long-form route and send us an email. Our address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget about our sponsor, Sparkplug Coffee. They offer Canadians and Americans who put our HYES promo code in the right box a 20% discount. The website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. All right, we're almost done here, but I owe you some answers to those trivia questions first. So number 1, who played Arnold's daughter in Commando? Young Schwarzenegger. It was a young Alyssa Milano. She was something like 12 when it came out. She, by the way, was my childhood crush when she was on Who's the Boss? Big fan of hers when I was about the same age, I guess. Question number 2. I was definitely not too old for her. I was about her age, maybe even younger. Number 2, who played Achu in Mel Brooks' Robin Hood Men in Tights? Obviously a play on Azim in Robin Hood, the Morgan Freeman character. Well, this was a young Dave Chappelle. He was only about 20 when it came out. I never crushed on Chappelle like I did Milano, although I liked him more before he started ripping into trans people so often. Jeez, dude, just leave them alone. And question number 3, what's the name of the movie where Russell Crowe tries to break his wife Elizabeth Banks out of prison? It's The Next 3 Days, which I saw on the big screen, and I feel like I saw it mostly alone. It was not a big hit. All right, then, I'm done. I just said next 3 days. Well, join me in 4 days for my one-man show about Le Samurai, and then again next Monday when Bev and I jaw about Sense and Sensibility. Meanwhile, I thank you for listening on this American Memorial Day, or just May 26th for the rest of us. While you guys eat hot dogs and drink beer, I'm going to put together a team and maybe go wipe out some guns. I'm going to get the guns. Maybe I'll even contribute to winning the war and save a few thousand lives while I'm at it. And cut.